Empires rise with swords and soldiers, right? Well, not always. Imagine this. Alexander the Great is charging across Persia with his army, but behind the scenes, what really keeps that empire running isn't shiny armor. It's gardens full of figs, dates and grapes. Here's the irony. The real superpower wasn't the battlefield, it was the backyard. The world's most powerful rulers were basically gardeners. Kings and emperors spent fortunes building massive orchards, vineyards and pleasure parks that secretly acted like farms on steroids. These weren't just for showing off pretty flowers. They were cash machines, pumping out millions in revenues, feeding cities and keeping armies marching. It's like if today the Pentagon also ran the world's biggest apple orchard. Strange, but true. So in this episode of Infinitia Verity, we're digging up the dirt, literally, on the gardens that fed entire empires. From Persia's paradise parks to Rome's villa estates, from Mughal saffron fields to Louis XIV's pineapple obsession at Versailles, we'll see how green spaces shaped global power. And hey, if you're new here, subscribe and ring that bell. Because here at Infinitia Verity, we don't just tell history. We reveal its hidden roots. To understand why gardens mattered so much, let's zoom out. Picture the ancient world like a giant school cafeteria. Everyone's trying to grab food, but only a few kids actually control the kitchen. Those kids, the emperors. Now, before giant supermarkets and global shipping, food was power. If you controlled farmland, you controlled people's stomachs. And if you controlled their stomachs, you controlled their loyalty. That's why ancient rulers didn't just want armies or palaces, they wanted gardens. Huge, walled, watered estates that were half farm, half luxury park. Politically, the big players were Persia, ruling from Iran to Egypt with kings like Darius. Assyria, the scary neighbor with terrifying armies and giant irrigation projects. Egypt, where the Ptolemies turned the Nile into a money-making garden. Rome, the master of estates and villas. And later, the Islamic caliphates, the Mughals in India, and even Louis XIV in France. Each empire discovered the same trick. If you want soldiers, silk and silver, start with soil. Think of it this way. Today's billionaires invest in tech. Yesterday's emperors invested in trees. Apple wasn't a company yet. It was literally apples. And those apples could fund an empire. Let's start with Persia. The Achaemenid kings, Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, built what they called paradisoi. That's where we get our word paradise. But don't imagine just pretty flowers. These were giant walled farms. Dates, pomegranates, melons, wheat, all carefully irrigated. Historian Pierre Briand says they weren't just parks, they were engines of empire revenues. Bryant, 107, 110. It's like the king had the world's biggest Whole Foods in his backyard, and every satrap or governor had to send tribute, often in produce. That food fed cities like Persepolis, and the surplus went into trade. Gardens were both picnic spots and piggy banks. Now imagine desert land suddenly sprouting orchards. That's what Assyria pulled off. King Sennacherib built massive aqueducts to bring water from miles away to his gardens at Nineveh. Stephanie Dalley argues these might actually be the real hanging gardens of Babylon. Dalley 62, 66. But again, this wasn't just flexing. These gardens produced figs, olives, grapes, feeding people and proving the king could tame nature itself. Conquered trees from foreign lands were replanted here. Every branch was a trophy of empire. Picture a zoo, but for plants. That's Assyria's garden, half orchard, half propaganda machine. When Alexander's generals took over Egypt, the Ptolemies turned the Fayum basin into a money factory. Joseph Manning shows how they engineered canals, filled the basin with vineyards, olive groves and papyrus fields. Manning 183, 190. Wine and papyrus exports alone made the treasury overflow. Think about it, papyrus was basically the Amazon Kindle of the ancient world. You couldn't write without it, and the Ptolemies sold it by the roll. Add grapes for wine and olives for oil. You get a kingdom that ran on gardens. The Romans loved gardens so much they built them into their capital. The haughty imperial garden estates weren't just pretty retreats. They had orchards, vineyards, even fish ponds. Nicholas Purcell notes they were like mini-farms inside the city itself. Purcell 1620. Hadrian's villa? It was half theme park, half working farm. Archaeology shows figs, grapes and exotic plants grown right there. Massey et al. Food for the emperor's table, yes, but also sold in markets. Rome was the empire where your landlord could literally be the emperor's gardener. Fast forward to early Islam. The Umayyads built palace gardens like Kirbat al-Mafjar near Jericho. Alan Walmsley says these estates combined villas with irrigated groves. Walmsley 245-249. Dates, citrus, wheat, grown in desert land with clever irrigation. The Abbasids went bigger. In Samarra, palaces stretched for miles along the Tigris. Hugh Kennedy shows how gardens here fed both the caliph's court and the markets. Kennedy 118-123. Imagine Washington, D.C., but with orange groves supplying the Pentagon cafeteria. By the early modern era, gardens were still empire weapons. Safavids in Persia, Shah Abbasite built estates filled with mulberries for silk and fruit for trade, Blake 88-92. Mughals in India, Ebba shows how Kashmir's Shalimar Gardens grew saffron and apples for empire revenues, Cook 45-51. France under Louis XIV, the Sun King, built the Potager du Roi, a kitchen garden at Versailles. Roy Strong notes it grew exotic fruit like pineapples, shocking Europe and showing off wealth, Strong 204-210. So from Isfahan to Paris, the logic was the same. Control food, control money, control power. So what's the legacy of these imperial gardens? First, they proved that empires weren't only about armies, they were about agriculture. Whoever mastered irrigation, orchards and estates could outlast rivals. Second, they shaped economies. Papyrus from Egypt, wine from Rome, saffron from Kashmir. All became global commodities because of imperial gardens. And third, they left us a cultural idea that paradise itself is a garden. From the Persian paradisos to modern parks, the link between gardens and power has never gone away. In short, empires were built not only on swords, but on soil. And that's the hidden truth. The real engines of empire weren't castles or catapults. They were cucumbers, papyrus, and pineapples. Next time you walk through a park, imagine it funding an army, or paying for a palace, or proving the might of a king. Thanks for watching Infinitia Verity. If you enjoyed this journey, smash that like button, share this video and subscribe for more secrets history forgot to tell you. Because sometimes the biggest battles weren't won with swords, they were won with seeds.